Hello, and welcome back to another edition of Focus One. The conventions are over, and we're about to round the bend and enter into the home stretch of the 2012 election season. What I'd like to do today is take some time to reflect upon the respective conventions, get a sense of how we think the Republicans and Democrats did generally, and how Obama and Romney did specifically. And most importantly, want to handicap the race and remind folks or point some things out in terms of what should we look towards as we enter into the home stretch. In order to do this, I've got some fresh blood that I'm bringing to the show. A couple of the brightest and most talented political commentators in the broader Tampa Bay area who were kind enough to drive down this morning and join me on my show. So without further ado, let me introduce Preston Rudy, political reporter for WTSP, the CBS station in Tampa. Welcome to the show, Preston.
Thanks, Frank. Thanks for having me.
And William, or Windy March, political writer and reporter for the Tampa Tribune up in Tampa. Welcome to the show.
Nice to be here, Frank.
All right, Windy, I just want to start with you. You're a veteran of political conventions. You just told us that you did not attend the Democratic convention this year, but that was the first one that you've missed in the last 4 cycles. All of us were at the Republican convention. Let's start there. Just give me some of your impressions of the Republican convention vis-a-vis the other ones that you've been to over the last couple of decades.
Well, it was, it seemed, Republicans don't normally have really raucous conventions like the Democrats do, but this one seemed, if anything, perhaps slightly more subdued. I won't say dull or boring, but I also won't say raucous or super energized. I guess I would say there were 2 big goals for Romney for this convention. One was to convince people that he's the man who can save the economy better than Barack Obama. The other is to get people to know him as a decent, humane guy rather than a cold machine-like.
Humanize him.
Right, not the cold machine-like CEO. And he did better on the second goal than the first. If you look at polls, his personal favorability went up more. He didn't get a real bounce versus Obama, but his personal favorability went up.
You know, what Wendy was saying, I agree. You know, it was weird. They obviously, I think, were hurt by Isaac. The fact that Monday was a day that didn't happen. Tuesday, I think there was a lot of, I don't want to say disappointment, but there was a lot of build up to Chris Christie's speech. And it kind of was flat. Now, there may be a number of reasons why that was. But to me, the convention in terms of the electricity there, maybe how it was perceived at home for those people that happened to be watching it, it really didn't turn on, it really didn't start until Condoleezza Rice took the stage on Wednesday night. When she walked into that room, I mean, you could just feel the energy just turn on.
What about Ann Romney, though? I thought...
You know, she did a great job for what her role was, but, you know, for outside of, I think, the far right, I don't know is if people listened to her speech at home and said, oh my gosh, I think completely different of Mitt Romney now, and I'm going to go and vote for him. I will say this, it was obvious that at the Republican National Convention, they were really trying to do their best to close that gender gap, to appeal to women. The other thing that was really, I think, was obvious being at the convention is that you could identify what states they knew they had to win. And they were really doing their best to try to cater to those states. We're from Florida, we know that. I mean, look, they can't get to the White House. They're not going to get to 270 unless they win the state of Florida. And it was obvious in terms of the reflection of the speakers they had, the number of speakers. And even if you went down onto the floor, and they do these designs, and I'm sure, Wendy, you can talk about this you know, better than I can. You know, they'll look at alphabetically, obviously, how they're going to lay out the states. It didn't take a genius to figure out that they had done 8 you know, all these different, you know, ways to lay out the floor until they figured out, okay, here we can have Florida near the front, we can have Ohio near the front, we can have New Hampshire near the front, we can have, I mean, it was laid out that you looked at it. We want to try.
There was a method to the
right. There was a method to it
to the layout. Certainly, I felt actually there on Monday and Tuesday. I felt for the Romney team with respect to dealing with these distractions. Again, one question after another. Are you going to change the schedule? Are you going to say something about Isaac? The other thing that they were dealing with, well, there were multiple things they were dealing with. We had, I think, our Governor Scott talking about how strong the economy was, which was a dissonant message than Romney's message, and then the Todd Akin story certainly was blowing up for the 2 weeks. And the Missouri delegates were running around complaining that, you know, the heavy hand of the Romney folks are trying to push us. So all of these distractions early on. I thought Chris Christie's speech was a little bit of a letdown. It wasn't all that bad. Somebody had to remind him he wasn't the nominee, I think, early on in the race. I did think Ann Romney did, in terms of what she was tasked to do and what she can do. She has to stay in, people are saying it's just another Stepford wife, but in terms of who she is, she didn't try to be anybody else. I thought that she was pretty effective, and then we got into the message, and I want to talk about this a little bit. I do think the Republicans have a clear governance philosophy that they put out there. They might overestimate its resonance with the broader American electorate, but one of the things right from Tuesday, I mean, they were hammering this narrative about we have a story to tell you, the entrepreneur, the small businessman or small businesswoman, they're the hero in the story, the government's the villain, and it's all about smaller, less intrusive government, lower regulations, lower taxes, and one after another, the speakers again would come out, even through the entire convention, very multicultural set of speakers hammering that message over and over. I thought they did a fairly good job of articulate that message. Whether or not it works, that's another question.
Yeah.
Well, they put the message out, no question about it, but what you're talking about, what you're doing, Frank, is you're describing a convention aimed mostly at the base, not a convention aimed at spreading the base or spreading the appeal. And I think that basically was their problem with that message.
Yeah, and we can segue into we'll go back and forth a little bit to the two conventions. They don't have to do them sequentially.
Let me ask you this. I mean, Wendy, you were there during as we led up to the beginning of the convention. And one of the things that they were trying to push and make a big deal was this debt clock that they had. Okay, and then when the convention started, I think it was on the Friday before they started the convention when they do the big stage reveal, they say, hey, now we've got a second clock. What surprised me was that they didn't make a bigger really highlight those clocks. I mean, literally stop and point and say, look at what is happening right now. When we say the voter
they got
at home,
onto the Obama comments. You didn't build that. That's where they wanted it. So they had the clocks over here.
But I thought if they're trying to reach, if they want to talk about the economy, they want to talk about jobs, and they want to talk about those kinds of things, to the viewer at home, to me, I think it is always strongest when you're going to talk about the economy to try to relate to your personal life. Look, you can't continue to charge everything. You can't continue to have negative dollars in your checking account. And I think people can relate to that. And that is a way that I think they could have made some headway, and they could have used those clocks to kind of tell that story. The American government and you at home, and I just didn't see it. I don't know, what did you think? I was surprised that they didn't play that up more.
Well, it didn't occur to me at the time. It does now that you say it. Yes, those clocks went up on the first day, and then you didn't hear that much more about them. I question, though, how much the debt itself is a pretty abstract issue. Right. And just take as an example one line from Mitt Romney's speech where he said, Barack Obama wants to heal the planet and stop global warming. I want to help you and your family. Yeah. Well, the clock is more of an abstract issue, just like Romney was trying to say that Obama is pursuing abstract goals, but I want to help you and your family at home. The clock is more of an abstract issue, and I think they were going for a direct or more emotional appeal. Yeah.
And I said it that night on Thursday, you hit it, Wendy. That was to me the strongest line when he said, my promise is to you and your family.
Right.
He's got to stay on that. That, I think, might have some traction if he continues to kind of
and we'll get to the Democrats in a second, because I think a different track, which was I didn't hear much in the way of a governance philosophy or a compelling argument about why the next 4 years are going to be better. What they just hammered this relatability issue. We feel your pain, stay the course. And it might have worked if you take a look at the polls in terms of the bounces coming out of the convention. But before we get onto the Democratic convention, I want to just come back to the Republican convention. I'm always interested in terms of the Floridians. It's they have you get your moments in the limelight. So just a general sense of how you think specifically Jed, Rubio, even Pam Bondi, how they used or didn't use their little time in the limelight. Obviously, some of the speaking slots are a lot better than others, but nevertheless, how do you think our Florida?
Well, as a political reporter, I think the role of the Floridians, mainly Jeb Bush and Marco Rubio, was one of the biggest stories there. Rubio, of course, is becoming a national rising star. He is ambitious. Jeb could be, if he wanted to be, if he chose to be, a national level Republican candidate. The question is whether he wants to be. The question is whether he has that ambition. Both of them spoke on the final night, had high-profile speaking slots. Rubio, of course, is probably the single most important individual in the Republicans' outreach to Hispanic voters. And the others in the convention, Pam Bondi.
What was up with that?
Well, the thing about it is,
dual attorney general, it was stiff, stale.
This wasn't a good idea. It was a little bit awkward. But here's what happened with Bondi. If the Supreme Court had ruled against the Affordable Care Act, Obamacare, Bondi would have been a major star at this convention. She had basically a stroke of extremely unfortunate luck in the court ruling the way it did, and thereby destroying what would have been an incredible moment in the limelight for her. She would have appeared as the personification of a major Republican victory. That didn't happen because of the court ruling.
Very good. I actually completely forgot about that, but that was a very good point. Jeb Bush, I thought, emphasized, I knew he was going to, probably a third to a half of his comments might be directed at education, but I was curious to see if he was going to try to, articulate a broader message. It looks like he definitely wanted to stay within the education realm.
Well, he does. Let me start, but there's one really crucial thing here. Do you remember at the opening of that speech, he took off on how criticizing Barack Obama for blaming many of the nation's problems on George W. Bush.
Right, yes.
That was ad-libbed. That was not part of the prepared text. He added that extemporaneously, at least as far as the reporters who received his prepared text were concerned. And this was a clear shot at trying to remove himself from the taint, if you will, of the national dissatisfaction with the Bush presidency. And he tacitly acknowledged, if you recall his wording in that, he tacitly acknowledged that dissatisfaction while defending his brother.
There's a curious smile and him, in a way, differentiating between his father and grandfather.
Exactly.
And then there's my brother, and I was, Paul, you're going to hammer your brother? And then he said some kind words about it.
And then he says, well, I love my brother.
Right. And then again, he said
and
something
he kept us safe.
And he kept us safe, and he got a big.
And it's interesting that, as this campaign continues to move forward back to Romney and Obama, that, the Obama administration wants to do everything they can to kind of tie Romney to Bush and kind of say, hey, we don't want to go back to that. I think that's part of the whole forward idea.
That's become a key point in Obama's stump speech. We've tried that.
Yep.
We've been there, done that.
Last thing before we move off the Republican convention, the Clint Eastwood moment. I don't want to eat up the entire show, but that was quite bizarre. If this was simply an improv routine, I thought it was quite humorous, at times certainly directed at a conservative audience. But we were talking, this was one of the things, you interviewed me prior to that event, and my big point was you want to go low risk. And you have this guy that goes off the cuff. I don't think there was a better rejoinder out there than Jon Stewart's. Apparently the Republicans have this alternative version of Obama that only they can see. I mean, you just teed it up in terms of one of the counter messages.
I heard more chair jokes in Charlotte than I think I care to have heard. But, obviously it was off the cuff. We've all heard the story now. Clint Eastwood has said that, he was backstage and somebody offered him a chair to sit down and he decided to take it out with him. I don't think it played the way. It became a distraction and it kind of took away from the night. The last thing you really want is the next day after your party's nominee speaks to have everyone talking about this other event.
If I'm one of the handlers, though, on the Romney campaign for the convention, you're going to run out somebody that's not a seasoned political veteran in prime time, and the guy says, I don't need a teleprompter, and says, yeah, don't worry, give me 5 minutes, I'll know what to. I'm a little uncomfortable with that. I mean, it's just a surprise that they actually ran him out without knowing what he was going to do.
They wanted his star power, they wanted his image. The Democrats have got all these celebrities, all these stars that they're trotting out at us, and the Republicans wanted something like that. Probably I thought Clinton's presentation was at least mildly amusing, and much of the reason that he seemed to be mumbling was he couldn't keep his face aimed directly into the microphone, so the microphone missed a lot and made him sound less coherent than he actually was. But the biggest problem with the Eastwood thing with this particular shtick was that it pushed out of prime time a really extremely well-crafted biographical video about Romney, which if you saw it, went a long way toward healing this problem that he has of not being seen as a likable, humane person.
Wendy, you are so right on that. The video that they showed, if that had been played to all of America, I think that would have gone a long way towards closing this gender gap and really boosting his likability. Now, when you're doing these highly produced pieces, you know, you really are in control of everything, and you can kind of influence a little bit. But boy, that really, I thought, I watched it as we sat there and watched it inside the arena. I said, man, if all of America saw this, he would probably, he would have a real good shot here, you know, and it would cure a lot of his problems in the polls.
Even without it, as we said, Romney did get some bump on his personal favorability, but I think he would have gotten more from that.
Yeah. By the way, go back to the Clint Eastwood thing, and Wendy, you can give me your thoughts on this because you've been covering politics a lot longer than I have. I really think that Republicans are beginning to acknowledge the fact that whether you like Hollywood stars or not, they carry some cachet or influence that for whatever reason, there are some voters that tend to just kind of follow along. And Republicans, there are a lot of musicians and actors and professional athletes that are conservative. And I think they've seen, you know, from Oprah Winfrey 4 years ago and so forth, we maybe need to kind of do something here to kind of show, hey, you know, we are a party that appeals to celebrities, and it's okay to be a conservative or Republican. And I think that's why they brought out Clint Eastwood.
Right.
And I think that was kind of the whole idea, and you're on TV, we're always fighting viewership, let's bring this guy out.
To their credit, they try to diversify the messengers with respect to, it was very multicultural. I think the percentage of prominent Hispanic women, I mean, if you were a prominent Hispanic governor, you were on the docket, not necessarily with respect to the celebrity class. Let me jump into the Democratic convention. Just some of, you were the only one of us that were actually there. Certainly the speeches, Castro and Clinton got the greatest buzz. Just some of your takeaways from the Democratic convention.
You know, as Wendy and I were talking earlier, definitely there was a lot more enthusiasm around the convention. It just seemed to have a lot more energy. And Wendy pointed out, as we were talking earlier, you know, one of the functions of that might, or one of the reasons for that might simply be that they have more delegates. I mean, more than 5,000 delegates are there, so you get a lot more people that are maybe a little bit more energized and excited inside that arena. It was also a smaller venue, so, you know, when things kind of get charged up and get going, they had a number of dynamic speakers. I was most impressed with Newark, New Jersey Mayor Cory Booker, who's going to be in the Bay Area next week on the 22nd. Dynamic speaker. I saw him twice, both speaking before the Florida delegation and then also when he spoke in the arena. He's somebody to keep an eye on. People have talked about that before. I mean, a lot of parallels between both he and Barack Obama, 43, you know, with age and a lot of other things. There just seemed to be a lot more energy and excitement surrounding their campaign. And Bill Clinton, between both conventions, by far and away the most engaging speaker of the.
He just relates well to the audience. Wendy, I mean, you from afar, like myself, in terms of watching it.
Well, I don't know that you can draw any political conclusion from this. Maybe it's pure coincidence, but the fact is that the Democratic Party, right at this particular moment, happens to have a roster of some of the most incredible, energizing political orators that I've seen in a long time. For the party to have Barack Obama, Bill Clinton, and you add Cory Booker to that list, and I think you're probably right. To have all of those three folks, John Lewis, you could name some more, and you could probably name a few more.
Castro, I mean, you know, he was well received. Michelle Obama, I mean, you know, her speech was very well received.
Again,
you know?
to have a first lady capable of doing what she did, and Romney did a fine job, but then so did Michelle. And who did the Republicans have to put up against that sort of dream team?
Was pretty good on the first night, so they've got a couple, but their bench is certainly not as deep as the Democrats.
They've got Marco Rubio. who is
Yeah.
who's an incredibly charismatic speaker, but he's one guy compared to quite a roster on the Democratic
And while he
side.
did a great job with what he was tasked with at the convention, I mean, his role was to kind of set up and introduce Mitt Romney. It wasn't like, here, go ahead and go. One guy that I was surprised that they didn't bring out was Rudy Giuliani. I mean, I thought he did such a strong job 4 years ago, and he was at the convention. If I was the Romney campaign, I would have put him
Yeah,
up
I wonder
there.
why. He's one of those figures within the Republican Party that does have.
I mean, I understand the whole Sarah Palin thing, but Rudy Giuliani would have been somebody that I would
He's
have...
not really tainted, I think, by the Sarah Palin thing.
Would
Other than
have
just
trotted
running in the
out.
same cycle. They chose not to do that. I thought that they might lay off Romney at the convention. They didn't. Certainly could continue to pound and attack both the messengers as well as the message. Certainly more red meat during the early hours and broader appeal pitches in prime time. And then I thought Obama, I was wondering if he would stick the landing. I didn't think so. It wasn't a horrible speech, but it was fairly pedestrian. Any reactions to Obama's speech?
Well, a lot of people said Clinton's was better. I think Obama maybe has an expectations problem. The bar is pretty high if you're Barack Obama.
No question. And they also boxed him. I think
speech.
the Republicans did a good job of attempting to box him in. One of the things that they harangued during their convention, was the soaring rhetoric. Ha ha ha! Look at all this soaring rhetoric. And I think sort of the subtext was like, if you hear this sort of grandiose, soaring rhetoric about expectations, look what happened the last time. And then they tried to box him in by, if he gets divisive, that's just because he can't run on his own record. He ended up not going with the soaring rhetoric option, but he continued to be,
Well, I think that's a key point, Frank, because what he wanted to do was present more of a program, more of a substantive vision rather than soaring rhetoric, and it's partly because of what you just said.
Right. And so here we are. We've come out of the two conventions, and the latest polls. There's a few of them that have a little bit of a bounce for the Democrats. So you've got the Roland Gallup poll, which some consider to be the gold standard, have him up by about 5 points. Rasmussen had him up. They've got a rolling poll about 5 points. A CNN opinion poll, they had him up by 6 points. There's another poll out today, Washington Post, ABC, that only has Obama up by 1, and there were a couple of others that were showing up by 1 or 2. What should we make of the polls right after the election? And then just to throw in, we had that sort of not so good jobs report that came out on Friday, Saturday. Week. I'm unsure of, again, how the degree to which that got factored in, and so where are we right now?
I'm pretty dismissive of polls until you get past the conventions, and I don't know how you feel about that, Wendy, but I think now is the time you really need to pay attention. Republicans are going to tell you, look, we need to again look at specific states where we're at. Where are the polls in North Carolina, in Wisconsin, in Florida, in Ohio? I mean, how are they doing there? I think that's where they really need to they're going to look at, and that's why they're going to say, yeah, let's not worry about a sinking ship here or anything like that at this point.
Well, I think Preston's right about both of the things he just said. Labor Day traditionally is the day when voters start to pay attention, and pollsters at that point, as of Labor Day, traditionally switch over from polls of registered voters to polls of voters who have been identified as likely voters.
Yeah.
And the polls at that point become more accurate, so they're going to mean a little more. But I think the other thing that you said also is really key, which is Obama has a small lead in nationwide voters polls, but his lead looks a whole lot more convincing if you instead look at where he's leading. If you look at electoral college maps, the Real Clear Politics and Pollster.com both have Obama with pretty substantial electoral college leads because of the states he's leading in.
Right. Yeah. And when it comes, let me just give you my take on some of the key swing states, and just correct me if you. I think it's going to be very difficult for Romney to win without winning both Ohio and Florida. I think it's game over if Obama wins Florida. If Obama loses Florida, if Romney wins Florida, loses Ohio, but then really cleans up on the rest of the swing states, there's a path there. Obama, on the other hand, could conceivably lose both Florida and Ohio, sweep the western swing states, and then pick up, a few of these other, whether it be Wisconsin, Iowa, New Hampshire, or either Virginia or North Carolina. So he has many more paths.
Oh, yes, there are.
Victory.
There is what you just pointed out, the path to victory that Obama can fall back on would involve losing both Florida and Ohio. which could happen. It's also entirely possible that he'll lose Florida. He can still get to 270 without Florida or Ohio. It's a tough path, but he could do it. But the Florida strategy that Obama is now playing, and that has been played going back to, it started really with Clinton in '96. The Democrat knows that the Republican cannot win without Florida. So the Democrat comes down here, he spends time, he makes appearances in Seminole like he did last week, and in Tampa like he's going to do September 20th. He spends millions and millions of dollars here. The Republican, knowing he can't afford to lose Florida, is therefore tied down here and must match and exceed those expenditures of time and money, therefore can't put that time and money into other swing states.
It's a very astute, savvy strategy.
And here's where Bush hurts Romney. He can't trot out Bush on the campaign trail. I'm going to an event tomorrow in Orlando with Bill Clinton. He's speaking today, he's speaking tomorrow. He can dispatch. Now that they seem to have kind of come together, Bill Clinton and Barack Obama, he can use Bill Clinton and he will appeal and help him with those independent voters. And that's where Romney has to win. And so he's got the advantage of kind of having that ace in the hole and send him out on the campaign trail.
The closest he can come is to trot out the brother, Jeb Bush, which is not a bad substitute.
So well, we're running down on time here. Looking ahead, we talked a little bit about not paying too much attention to the polls. We're beyond Labor Day now. We're beyond the conventions. What are some of the critical markers that you're going to focus on going forward, some of the factors that might swing the election one way or another, barring some sort of October surprise, either
Well, I mean, you certainly see what happens at the debates. I think that's one thing. I'm going to be looking at polling numbers as they continue to look at younger voters. I think that's an area that the Democrats are worried about. 4 years ago, there was a lot of excitement, a lot of buzz around Barack Obama, and they did a great job at getting younger voters out. You heard that repeatedly at the convention and at the delegate speeches. Younger voters are not as tied in on this election, are not as excited about going to the polls yet. The latest numbers that I saw was something like 57% of 18 to 29-year-olds say that they're likely to vote, compared to 78% 4 years ago. Does that shift? That may be an opening for conservatives as well here.
Good point, yeah.
Well, like Preston said, the debates are going to be important. Either candidate could still win or lose this election in the debates. Now, if you remember the primary, Mitt Romney did a good, solid job in his debates, rarely screwing up. There were, I guess, a couple of gaffes, I can't bring them to mind, but very rarely screwing up. Barack Obama, of course, is an accomplished debater, and Romney has reason to worry about him, but then Romney has been able to hold his own. Again, I'll be following the polls on a state-by-state basis, probably more than on a national basis. I'll be looking for whether Medicare, which hasn't really blossomed as being as much of an issue as a lot of people thought it would with Ryan, I'll be looking for whether that really begins to take off or intensify as an issue, and then I'll be continuing to watch the economic news.
Yeah, I think if I had to pick a date, right around October 15, I think there's going to be, we'll have our first debate between Romney and Obama. We'll get our jobs report for the month of September, and then we'll have a vice presidential debate. Now, not that people are voting at the top of the ticket, but the Ryan-Biden matchup looks interesting. I mean, it's going to be an opportunity for the country to see Ryan debate, not in a policy think tank, but for about an hour plus on television. And Biden's a wild card. You never know what you're going to get with him. And so once you get to, I think, mid-October, when you're having a lot of people start to tune in, if there's a lead on, especially in the swing states at that point, and there's not a lot of volatility, that would mean a whole lot more than looking at the polls right now. Any parting thoughts?
I said it at the convention. The roadmap for success for the Republicans is what Paul Ryan said on his night on Wednesday night during his acceptance speech. They need to follow that speech, and that's going to be the best shot. For Obama, I think it's going to be the same thing. He's got to convince people that the mess was too big. He needs more time, and I think he's going to rely heavily on Bill Clinton to help him with independence in key states. I think that's going to be their kind of roadmap to success.
Wendy?
Well, we didn't talk about Charlie Crist, which we had planned to do before the program began. The one thing I was going to say about the former governor is that a poll came out yesterday done by stpetepolls.org. I don't know if you're aware of it. There are not a super experienced political pollster, but it showed Christ with a very long lead over Alex Sink among a sample
Let's
of
take a minute or two and
registered-
talk about this. I can run over some of
Well, it showed Charlie Crist with a very long lead, 61 to 25, over Alex Sink among a sample of registered Democratic voters in a hypothetical 2014 governor's primary. Okay, now that's just startling that Crist
Yes.
should be that far ahead of Alex Sink among registered Democrats.
Wow.
There are a couple of caveats, though, that you have to, a couple of grains of salt that you got to take with this poll. It's always difficult to poll primaries because primaries depend on who turns out, who goes to the polls. And this poll looked at registered Democrats who had voted, who had cast a vote in a recent election. That doesn't necessarily mean they're likely voters. It doesn't necessarily mean they're the kind of party activist super voters who are likely to come out in a primary. So what this poll probably reflects is more Charlie Crist's name recognition among the broad swath of all registered Democrats than his standing among those who are likely to actually
Although you would
choose a
think
nominee.
Alex Sink would do fairly well, though, with that group. I mean, I can
The
understand
margin
maybe
is
a
still a
Rich
bit
or what.
startling. The prospect of our Florida state legislator having to work with Charlie Crist, again wearing a Democrat hat, that's really
It would be
I
almost
think-
funny to watch their heads explode, but I think what you just said is interesting. It's all the caveats I mentioned, still the fact that he gets 61%.
Yeah, right. I think he's going to try to do an end around here. There's a lot of people that, he didn't show up at the Florida delegation breakfast any day. You would think that, okay, if this guy is going to run for governor, if he's serious about it, or is really thinking about being a Democrat, wouldn't he go there? But I think he just didn't want to walk into that environment. He spent his entire time there, I think, pressing the flesh, trying to line up money, finances, and I think what he's going to try to do is he's rolling the dice that Barack Obama is going to get reelected, and then he'll use Barack Obama to come back and say, this is our guy. I think that's
fascinating.
And
it may
I
very
think,
well work.
Yeah, and I think that given some of the sentiments that I've heard from Democrats, I think that's his best play, and they're going to say, look, it's the lesser of two evils, and I can win this thing.
Charlie
So-
Crist, we thought he was done. We might be talking about him a lot over the next couple of years. With that, I think I'll wrap it up on this edition of Focus One. We'll catch you again next week. Thanks for joining in.